I have a little confession to make and probably an apology. My focus on most of these videos has been us, me and you, and the decisions that we make in our everyday lives. In doing that, I think I'm actually playing into a narrative that says it's your fault. And yeah, to some extent it is. We consume, we burn fossil fuels in our homes and in our cars, we choose to travel. But when it comes down to it, we really don't have many options. We live in a system that's relied on fossil fuels for decades. A system that's been built on coal and then oil and maybe now gas. We live in a system where governments subsidise environmental disaster and make decarbonisation more difficult. A system where we are advertised at, coerced, influenced, pushed into consuming more and more and more. A systems where high emission lives are simply the norm. So as well as thinking about the things that we can control, the choices that we can make today, I'm going to talk about something today that we could try to influence that would change the whole system. My name is Tom, and this is a little series about a low carbon lifestyle. The 26th Conference of the Parties is a global United Nations summit for 12 days this November. The summit is specifically about climate change, its impacts, its relevance, and how countries plan to respond to it. The Conference of the Parties, or COP, happens every year. The last event was in Madrid in 2019 because the event planned for this year was postponed last year due to the pandemic. A host country gets to set the tone for the negotiations. Someone from that country is the COP president for that year. For us this year it's Business Secretary Alok Sharma. But world leaders from all around the world are likely to be present or at least contribute in some way. You may have heard of the Paris Agreement, and that was one of the more significant COPs because 195 countries agreed to make significant reductions in their emissions in an attempt to keep global temperatures well below 2 degrees of warming. We're about 1 degree now. And maybe even more importantly than 2 degrees, they were going to attempt to limit warming to less than 1.5 degrees. COP21 in Paris became almost notorious because of certain American politicians, and a lot of them, blaming it for a wide range of problems in America. The less said about that, the better, I think. The reality of the Paris Agreement was that although it was a significant step forward, or really meaningful, added together, the pledges that countries in the Paris Agreement made weren't enough to avoid catastrophic climate change. In fact, it's thought that if you add up all those pledges, the reduction in emissions would only be 1% by 2030, even though the UN itself is calling for a 45% reduction by 2030 to keep global heating to below 1.5 degrees. So Paris was a start, but it really does need a significant update. Since the Paris Agreement, countries like the UK have set a date of 2050 to be net zero and to have almost 70% reduction in emissions by 2030. The EU has done something similar with a 55% reduction by 2030, and importantly, last year China pledged to be net zero before 2060. And these are major steps forward that will significantly improve the outcome at the next negotiations in Glasgow this year. One important part of the Paris Agreement stated that every 5 years member countries would review what they call their nationally determined contributions. They'd see if they could do more. And these are voluntary contributions, they're not like legally binding, but are about emissions reduction and climate finance, for example. So COP26 happens to be 5 years after the Paris Agreement. And countries will be bringing their proposals for discussion. Some will be much more ambitious than others. Many will be trying to get something out of the bigger, more powerful countries in return. And this will be the first COP since the global pandemic. And you can imagine therefore that as countries look to restart their economies, the pledges made at these negotiations could make or break a country's welfare. Pope Francis has warned that it would be a scandal if the money governments are spending to rebuild economies and save businesses, in his words, were to focus on rescuing those industries that do not contribute to the inclusion of the excluded, the promotion of the least, the common good, or the care of creation. Such important words and such helpful words from Pope Francis. So I hope that you agree that the 26th Conference of the Parties is relevant to all of us. The outcomes of this set of meetings, these negotiations, could have an impact on our planet for centuries. With bold decision making, we could see significant progress. We could see a planet acting in solidarity, united against a common foe, working to transform the lives of literally billions of people. The prize in Glasgow is massive. You can imagine, therefore, how important clear leadership will be in November, and actually in the run-up to November. But the negotiations themselves can appear lofty, irrelevant, or out of reach for you and me. I am, however, asking you right now to do something. Even though the negotiations are lofty, the decisions made by our elected officials, the promises made, the pledges made, and actually the tone set could have a multiplier effect on the outcome of the event. If our government decide to take the chance they have an opportunity to go down in history as great leaders representing Great Britain. Fortunately, every single one of us has an elected member of parliament that represents us in parliament. They can lobby, they can cajole, they can question and influence those in charge. So, I have a message for your MP that I would love you to send to them. The text of it will be linked below. Please go on to theyworkforyou.com, put your postcode in and find out who your MP is. Click on send a message and write a message for your MP. Ask them to push government for significant contributions to COP26. They'll either read the message themselves or at least a member of their team will read the message, and they will respond to you in some way. Imagine if our government was able to lead a COP that was even more significant than Paris. If in Glasgow our government was able to bring the world together under a shared purpose, able to commit to lead in emissions reduction, able to make a significant difference and significant influence, that would be incredible. If Paris was the first step, imagine if Glasgow was where the world burst into a run. So please message your MP. Write your own words or use mine below. Thank them for all they do. Encourage them for meaningful action in Glasgow. And maybe even tag them in this video. My name is Tom, and this is a little series about a load